The moment she closed that door with him, something in me went quiet. Not angry, peaceful. I lit the stove, turned my back on the noise, and drove until I found a diner where a woman I'd never met served me pie and reminded me what kindness felt like. The story begins not with a bang, but with the slow, suffocating weight of a summer afternoon. I was stationed behind the grill, the unofficial mayor of the barbecue, a role I'd grown comfortable in over the years. The charcoal hissed and crackled beneath the patties, sending up spirals of smoke that stung my eyes and blurred the scene unfolding across the yard. But I didn't need clear vision to see what I'd been trying to ignore for months. Vanessa stood by the rose bushes, a cluster of friends around her, but she wasn't with them. She was angled toward Derek. It was in the small things, the details that accumulate like dust until one day you realize you can't breathe. The way her head tilted when he spoke, as if his words were the only ones worth catching. The way her laugh came easier, higher, a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. She wore a white sundress, simple and elegant, and a new pair of sandals I'd never seen before. I noticed because I noticed everything about her. Or at least I used to. The afternoon stretched on, golden and lazy, but my focus narrowed to a single point. I flipped burgers on autopilot, my eyes following them as they drifted from the rose bushes to the shaded patio. At one point, Derek reached for a bottle of water and his fingers brushed her wrist. She didn't pull away. She glanced at him, a quick fleeting look, but I caught it. It was a look I remembered from 10 years ago, back when I was the one making her laugh like that. I felt the heat of the grill on my face, but inside a cold clarity was forming. I thought about the late nights at her office, the way she'd recently changed her phone password, the new perfume she wore only on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the days she had strategy meetings with him. I'd asked her about it once casually, and she'd snapped at me for being paranoid. I believed her because I needed to, because the alternative was unthinkable. Then I saw Vanessa lean in close to him, her lips brushing his ear. Derek nodded, set down his drink, and they both began walking toward the house. Toward the downstairs bathroom. The one with the door that locked. The one tucked away from the party, from the laughter, from me. I stood frozen, spatula in hand, watching her white sundress disappear through the French doors. The screen door banged shut behind them, a sound so ordinary, yet it felt like the closing of a casket. Around me the party continued. Someone asked for another burger. Ice clinked in glasses. A child shrieked with laughter by the pool. But I heard none of it. I only heard the blood rushing in my ears and the distant, mocking chirp of a cricket hiding somewhere in the overgrown ivy. And in that moment, standing in the smoke and the noise, I made a choice. Not to rage. Not to follow. But to simply stop. To stop pretending. To stop hoping. To stop being the man who grilled burgers while his wife disappeared with another man. The matchbook was in my pocket. The grill burner had gone out. And I knew exactly what I was going to do next. The screen door banged shut. And something inside me didn't break. It went silent. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of a battlefield after the last cannon fades. A strange, unnerving peace settled over my shoulders like a wool blanket, heavy and warm. I looked down at the grill. The front left burner had sputtered out, the flame extinguished by a drip of grease, but I could still hear the soft hiss of gas escaping. Invisible. Odorless. Dangerous. My hand moved before my mind caught up. It slid into my pocket and closed around the small matchbook from the hardware store. The one I'd used to light the charcoal hours ago. Back when my biggest concern was whether the patties were overcooked. I pulled it out. My fingers weren't shaking. That surprised me most of all. I should have been trembling with rage, with heartbreak, with the urge to kick down that bathroom door and demand answers I already knew. But my hands were steady. I struck the match. The sound was sharp, definitive. A tiny explosion of friction against the world I'd known moments before. I held it for a second, watching the flame dance at the tip, impossibly small yet impossibly bright against the fading afternoon light. Then I lowered it to the burner. The gas caught with a soft whoosh, a deep blue circle blooming to life beneath the grill grate. The heat washed over my face and I felt it. Not revenge. Not anger. Just warmth. I turned the knob, adjusting the flame to low. A small, deliberate act of control in a moment where I had none over anything else. The burner hummed quietly, steadily, as if nothing had happened. As if my entire marriage hadn't just walked through a door with another man. Around me, the party continued its lazy pulse. Someone laughed near the cooler. The host called out asking if the burgers were ready. I looked at the grill at the neat rows of patties sizzling peacefully, and I realized I didn't care about any of it anymore. Not the food. Not the small talk. Not the performance of being a happy husband at a summer barbecue. I wiped my hands on the towel tucked into my apron. Vanessa had bought that apron, I remembered suddenly 2 Christmases ago, joking that every grill master needed one, and I untied it slowly. Methodically. I folded it and placed it on the small table next to the condiments. Then I walked toward the host, my friend since college, and I told him I wasn't feeling well. The lie came easily, smoothly, as if I'd rehearsed it. He frowned with concern, asked if I needed a ride. I said no, I had my car. I thanked him for the invitation. I shook his hand. At no point did I look back at the house, at the French doors, at the bathroom window. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, each step taking me further from the woman I'd married and closer to something I couldn't yet name. I slid into the driver's seat, and the leather was hot from the sun. I started the engine. I pulled out of the driveway, and I drove. Not home. Home was full of her things, her smell, her lies. I just drove, the windows down, the summer air hot and thick against my face. And in the rearview mirror, the party shrank to a speck of light, then disappeared entirely. The only thing I carried with me was the memory of that blue flame and the strange, quiet peace of knowing I had chosen myself. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. I drove for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 40 minutes. The roads grew darker, the neighborhoods unfamiliar, and still I kept going, as if enough distance could outrun the image of that white sundress disappearing through the French doors. When I finally stopped, it wasn't by choice. My tank was nearly empty, and my eyes were blurring with a fatigue that had nothing to do with sleep. The diner sat at the edge of town like an afterthought, a silver bullet from another era tucked between a shuttered auto shop and a field of wild grass. The neon sign flickered weakly, Ruby's Diner. The letter R sputtering on and off in a slow, arrhythmic pulse. I parked and just sat there for a moment, engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of a highway I couldn't see. Then I went inside. The bell above the door chimed, a small, cheerful sound that felt almost offensive. The air wrapped around me warm, thick with the smell of old grease and fresh coffee and something sweet, like cinnamon. Vinyl booths lined the windows, their red cushions cracked and worn but clean. A counter stretched along the back, lined with swivel stools upholstered in chrome and faded turquoise. It was the kind of place time had forgotten, and right then that's exactly where I needed to be. A woman looked up from behind the counter. She wasn't young, but that's not the right way to say it. She was somewhere in her 40s, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a few silver threads catching the fluorescent light. Her eyes were tired but alert, the kind of tired that comes from years of early mornings and late nights, not from lack of sleep. She wore a simple uniform, white blouse, black apron, name tag that read Lena. She didn't rush over with a menu or a fake smile. She just nodded, picked up a coffee pot, and gestured toward a booth by the window. I slid in, the vinyl sighing beneath me, and she appeared a moment later, filling a thick white mug without asking if I wanted it. The coffee was black, strong, and burned going down. I welcomed the pain. It was something real. I sat there for a long time, staring out at the empty parking lot, at the occasional car passing on the road beyond. The coffee grew cold. I didn't move. I didn't think about Vanessa or Derek or the blue flame. I just existed, hollow and still, in that quiet bubble of fluorescent light. Then Lena was there again. She didn't say anything. She just reached across and slid a small plate in front of me. A slice of apple pie still warm. A small scoop of melting vanilla ice cream pooling at its edge. I looked up at her, and she met my gaze with something I hadn't expected. Not pity, not curiosity, just simple, quiet recognition. "You look like you could use this more than the coffee," she said. Her voice was low, warm, rough around the edges like the diner itself. She didn't wait for a response. She just turned and walked back to the counter, picking up a rag and wiping a spot that didn't need wiping. I looked down at the pie. Steam rose from the crust. The ice cream had begun to form a sweet, creamy lake. And for the first time since that screen door banged shut, I felt something other than numbness. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even relief. It was just a small flickering warmth like a pilot light, somewhere deep in my chest. I picked up the fork. I took a bite. And in that dingy diner at the edge of nowhere, surrounded by cracked vinyl and flickering neon, I began very slowly to feel like I might eventually be okay. The first week I told myself it was the coffee. The second week I admitted it was her. I became a regular at Ruby's diner without ever deciding to. 3 nights a week, then almost every night. I'd arrive after 9, when the dinner rush had died and the late crowd hadn't yet stumbled in. I'd take the same booth by the window, the one with the tiny tear in the vinyl near the wall, and I'd order coffee and sit with my sketchpad. It was a ritual, small and insignificant to anyone watching, but to me it was a lifeline. Lena never asked why I kept coming. That was the first thing I noticed about her. She didn't push. She'd appear with the coffee pot every 20 minutes, refilling my mug without a word. Sometimes she'd glance at my sketchpad, her eyes lingering for a moment longer than necessary, but she never commented. She just moved through the diner with a quiet grace, wiping counters, refilling sugar dispensers, calling out orders to the cook through the small window to the kitchen. She moved like someone who had learned to be invisible. And yet I couldn't stop seeing her. One slow Tuesday night, the diner was empty except for us. Rain tapped against the windows, a soft, persistent rhythm that made the space feel even smaller, more intimate. I was sketching the neon sign outside, trying to capture the way the light blurred through the wet glass. Lena was at the counter sorting through a stack of receipts, a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose. I'd never seen her in glasses before. They made her look softer somehow, more vulnerable. She caught me looking. Not staring, just looking, the way you look at something you're about to draw. She didn't look away. Instead, she smiled, a small hesitant curve of her lips, and said, "You're going to give yourself away, you know, staring like that." I felt heat rise to my cheeks, something I hadn't felt since high school. I wasn't staring. I was studying. There's a difference. She laughed then, a Rayal laugh, low and warm, and it filled the empty diner like music. Studying what, exactly? I didn't have an answer. Or rather, I had too many answers. I was studying the way a single strand of silver hair had escaped her ponytail and curled against her temple. The way her fingers moved when she worked, efficient and careful, like someone who respected the small things. The way her tired eyes could still hold a spark of something curious, something young. Instead of answering, I turned my sketchpad around and showed her. It wasn't the neon sign. It was her. A simple pencil sketch, rough around the edges, but her. The curve of her jaw, the reading glasses, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. She stared at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I held my breath, suddenly terrified I'd overstepped, that I'd made her uncomfortable, that I'd ruined whatever quiet understanding we'd built. Then she reached out, her fingers hovering just above the paper, not quite touching. "You drew me," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "You were worth drawing," I said. She looked up, and in her eyes I saw something shift. Not walls coming down. Lena didn't have walls, not really. She had something softer, something more like mist. And in that moment the mist parted, and I caught a glimpse of the woman beneath. The one who had dreams once. The one who still took photos of the city at dawn on her phone because some part of her still needed to create. The one who had learned to be invisible, but hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be seen. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She just reached across the table, her fingers brushing my wrist for the briefest second, warm, electric, gone too soon, and then she stood and walked back to the counter. But before she did, she glanced back over her shoulder. And in that glance, in the soft rainlight of the empty diner, I understood that something had begun. Something I hadn't expected. Something I hadn't been looking for. Something that felt for the first time in years like coming home. 3 weeks into my new ritual, the night came that changed everything. It was past midnight, the kind of hour when the world feels suspended between one day and the next. The diner was empty except for me and Lena. Even the cook had gone home, leaving only the two of us and the low hum of the refrigerators. Rain had been falling for hours, a steady drum against the windows that made the fluorescent lights feel warmer than they should. I was in my usual booth, but I wasn't sketching the sign anymore. I was sketching her. She was at the counter, wiping it down for the 4th time that night, moving in slow, deliberate strokes. She thought I was lost in my own world, staring out at the rain, but I wasn't. I was watching the way her shoulders curved forward with exhaustion, the way her hand gripped the rag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I was capturing the tired grace in her posture, the quiet dignity of a woman who had spent her whole life serving others and asking for nothing in return. The sketch grew beneath my pencil, line by line, shadow by shadow. I drew the silver in her hair that the fluorescent lights couldn't hide. I drew the small scar near her eyebrow, a detail I'd noticed weeks ago but never mentioned. I drew the way her lips pressed together when she concentrated, a thin line of determination. And when I finished, I just sat there looking at her. She must have felt my gaze. She turned, and for a moment, we just looked at each other across the empty diner. Then she saw the sketchpad in my hands, saw my eyes flicker down to it, and understood. A blush crept up her cheeks, slow and pink, visible even from across the room. Lena, who never seemed flustered by anything, was blushing. "What are you doing?" she asked, but her voice wasn't accusing. It was soft, almost breathless. I didn't answer. I just motioned for her to come over. She hesitated, the rag dangling from her fingers, and then she walked toward me, each step slow, uncertain. When she reached my booth, she didn't sit. She just stood there looking down at me, and I turned the sketchpad around. She went very still. The drawing wasn't just a likeness. It was her. The exhaustion. The strength. The loneliness she hid so well. The beauty she probably didn't see when she looked in the mirror. All of it captured in graphite and shadow. She stared at it for a long time, her lips parted slightly, her eyes moving across the page like she was reading a story about herself she'd never been told. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright. Not with tears exactly, but with something close. Something that had been locked away for a long time. "No one's ever." She stopped, swallowed, tried again. "No one's ever drawn me before. Not like this. Not like I was worth." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. And then, without thinking, without planning, without any of the hesitation that had defined the past few weeks, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was warm, slightly rough from years of work, from countless nights wiping counters and washing dishes. But beneath that roughness was a softness I hadn't expected. Her fingers curled around mine, gentle but sure, and the contact sent a shock through my entire body. Not electric, not urgent, but deep. Resonant. Like a note struck on a cello, felt more than heard. I looked down at our hands. Her skin against mine. Older. Worn. Beautiful. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered. The words hung in the air between us, fragile and profound. I looked up into her eyes, and for the first time I didn't see the waitress. I didn't see the age difference. I didn't see the diner or the rain or the ghost of my marriage still clinging to my shadow. I just saw Lena. And she was seeing me. The rain continued to fall against the windows. The refrigerators hummed their steady song. And two people, lost in their own ways, held hands across a cracked vinyl table and let themselves, for just a moment, be found. A week passed after the night she touched my hand. A week of stolen glances, of charged silences, of moments that stretched just a second too long. I came to the diner every night, and Lena was always there, and neither of us mentioned what had happened. It hung between us like a held breath, waiting to be released. Then the papers arrived. I hadn't told her about the divorce proceedings. It didn't seem fair to bring Vanessa into the quiet space we'd built, to let my failed marriage stain the only clean thing in my life. But the morning the judge's signature made it official, I found myself driving to the diner in the afternoon, when I knew it would be empty, when I knew she'd be alone. Lena was in a booth near the back, going through inventory sheets, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She looked up when the bell chimed, surprise flickering across her face. I never came during the day. I never sought her out like this. But one look at me and she knew. She set down her pencil, slid out of the booth, and walked toward me without a word. I pulled the folded papers from my jacket pocket and held them out. She took them, her eyes scanning the legal language, the stamps, the signature at the bottom. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. "It's over," I said. "Finally. Completely." I expected relief. I expected her to smile, to reach for me, to finally let down the last of her guard. Instead, something in her eyes shuddered. She handed the papers back carefully, almost formally, and stepped away. Marcus. Her voice was quiet, careful. I need you to hear me. Really hear me. The way she said my name, not the usual warmth but something cautious, protective, made my stomach drop. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture I'd never seen her use. I'm 44 years old. I've spent half my life serving coffee to people who don't see me. I've been the soft landing for men before. Men who were lonely, men who were healing. Men who needed someone to hold them until they were ready to find someone younger. Someone their own age. Each word landed like a small, precise cut. Not cruel. Just honest. I can't be that for you, she continued. I won't. You just got out of a 10-year marriage. You're barely 30. And I'm. She gestured at herself, at the diner, at everything. I'm a waitress at a diner that time forgot. I'm not your future. I'm just the quiet place you landed when your world fell apart. I stood there, the divorce papers cold in my hand, and I let her finish. I let her lay out every fear, every insecurity, every wall she built over decades of being overlooked. And when she was done, when her arms were wrapped tight around herself and her eyes were bright with unshed tears, I finally spoke. You're right. She blinked, startled. You're absolutely right, I said. You could be a soft landing. You could be a rebound. You could be all the things you're afraid of being. I took a step closer, slow, giving her room to retreat. She didn't. But that's not what you are. That's not what this is. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something small, the sketch I'd done of her that first night, the one where she was wiping the counter, tired and beautiful. I'd carried it with me for weeks, folded carefully, like a talisman. When I sat in this diner the night I left my wife, I said, I wasn't looking for anything. I was just trying to survive. But then you gave me pie. You didn't ask questions. You didn't offer pity. You just saw me. And every night since you've kept seeing me. Not the married guy, not the guy who got cheated on, not some project. Just me. I unfolded the sketch and held it out. This isn't about loneliness. It's not about rebound. It's about the fact that for the first time in 10 years, someone looks at me and I don't feel like I'm performing. I feel like I'm home. Her eyes dropped to the sketch, then rose to meet mine. The walls were still there, but I could see the cracks. I'm not asking you to be my future, I said quietly. I'm asking you to be my present. Right here, right now. And if tomorrow comes and things change, we'll face it together. But don't push me away because you're afraid of a future that hasn't happened yet. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. The refrigerators hummed. A car splashed through a puddle outside. Lena looked at me, really looked, and I saw the moment her defenses began to lower. Not all the way, not yet, but enough. 3 weeks passed after that conversation in the empty diner. 3 weeks of slow, careful steps. Lena didn't rush into anything, and neither did I. We moved like people learning to trust solid ground after years of shaky foundations, testing each step, but moving forward all the same. She let me take her to breakfast at a different diner, just to prove I didn't love her for the coffee. She laughed at that, a Real laugh, and I filed the sound away in my memory like a photograph. We walked through the city at dawn, and she showed me her secret spots. The fire escape where she watched the sunrise, the abandoned pier where she took photos of the water, the tiny park with the swings where she sometimes sat when the world felt too heavy. She let me see her world and I let her see mine. I showed her my workshop, the antique furniture in various stages of restoration. She ran her fingers over a half-finished chair, over the smooth wood and the careful joinery, and she said, "You fix things. That's what you do. You find things people think are broken, and you remind them they're still beautiful." I didn't tell her she was talking about herself. I didn't have to. The afternoon I came to the diner during daylight, the closed sign hanging on the door. She was in a booth near the window, going through paperwork. The sun streamed through the glass, catching the dust motes and turning them into tiny stars. She looked up, surprised, and I slid into the seat across from her. Without a word, I opened my sketchpad and laid it on the table between us. The first page was the diner at night, the neon sign bleeding through rain-streaked glass. The second was her behind the counter, reading glasses perched on her nose. The third was her hands, detailed and worn and beautiful. Page after page, weeks of drawings, all of her. She turned each one slowly, her fingers gentle against the paper, her eyes growing brighter with every page. Then she reached the last drawing. It was us. Not in the diner, but in a place we'd never been. A sunlit park, green grass, a bench overlooking water. She was laughing, her head tilted back, and I was beside her holding her hand, laughing too. In the background, the city skyline rose soft and golden. It was a drawing of a moment that hadn't happened yet. A drawing of a future. She stared at it for a long time. When she finally looked up, tears traced silent paths down her cheeks. "What is this?" she whispered. I reached across the table and took her hand. "It's what I see when I close my eyes. It's where I want to be. Not someday. Not when it's convenient. Now. With you." She shook her head slowly, but she wasn't saying no. She was just trying to understand. "I'm 44. I work in a diner. I have nothing to offer you except everything," I finished. "Except kindness and strength and the way you see people. Except the way you made me feel human when I felt like nothing. Except you, Lena. Just you." She looked at our hands, her fingers intertwined with mine. Then she looked at the drawing again, at the future I'd imagined for us. And slowly, so slowly, a smile broke through the tears. Not the careful smile she gave customers. Not the tired smile she gave the world. A real smile. Hopeful. Young. Free. "We're going to need a bigger sketch pad," she said quietly. I laughed and she laughed with me, and in that dusty afternoon light, in that diner that had held so many of our quiet moments, we sat together and talked about nothing and everything. About her photography and my furniture, and the apartment she'd always wanted with a window that faced east. About the places we'd go, the things we'd see, the life we'd build from the ground up. Later, when the sun began to sink and the diner grew golden, I helped her close up. I held the door while she locked it, and then we stood together on the sidewalk, the warm evening air wrapping around us. She slipped her hand into mine and we started walking. Not toward anything in particular, just forward. Together. Behind us, the neon sign flickered once, twice, then glowed steady in the gathering dusk. Ahead of us, the city stretched out, full of possibility. And in between, two people who had found each other in the quiet hours, who had seen each other when no one else did, walked hand in hand into their first real beginning.